a warm welcome to everyone to this CPC seminar. I'm Athena Vlahantoni. I'm one of the academics in the Center for Population Change. I am absolutely delighted to introduce you to the speaker today, who is Dr. Yazhen Yang. She's currently a postdoctoral fellow funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, and she has a background in gerontology here in Southampton. So today she'll be talking about the impact of grandparenting on late life depression in England, Europe, and China. We will take about 30 to 40 minutes for the talk, and then we will have a discussion or questions. But in the meantime, if you would like to add your question in the chat, we can add that at the end. So Yazhen, with no further delay, a very warm welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Athena. So I'm going to share my screen now. So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me at this webinar. My name is Yazhen Yang, and I'm an ESRC-funded postdoctoral research fellow at the ESRC South Coast Doctoral Training Partnership and based in the Department of Gerontology, University of Southampton. I've been investigating grandchild caring and late life depression across England, Europe, and China in my current project, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share my research with you. I'm deeply grateful to Athena Vlahantoni and Maria Evandro for their continuous support on this research. So, why is examining grandchild caring and grandparents' depression important? Approximately 1 billion people in the world's population are grandparents. Therefore, it is crucial to understand the impact of grandparenting on grandparents' health. According to previous research, the influence of grandparenthood on people's health varies across individuals. On the positive side, becoming a grandparent brings opportunities to interact with the younger generation and can provide a new sense of purpose and pride. Research shows that becoming a grandparent can be beneficial for grandparents' subjective well-being and depressive symptoms and can prevent Alzheimer's disease. However, research also shows that grandparenting can cause intergenerational conflicts and stress and increase how old the grandparent feels. Grandparenting is also characterized by cultural variation. For example, one study based on the shared data suggests a north-south gradient in Europe in terms of grandchild care provided by grandparents. As shown in Figure 1, the provision of grandchild care is most prevalent in Nordic countries such as Denmark and Sweden, and least prevalent in Southern European countries such as Spain and Italy. This may sound strange, but we have an explanation later. So the order of countries changes almost completely if the intensity of grandchild care is considered. Grandparents in Greece, Italy, and Spain are most likely to provide frequent grandchild care, which means weekly or more often provision, and their counterparts in Sweden and Denmark are least likely to do so. Such pattern in Europe can be explained by the national differences in the contextual structural factors, including formal childcare provision and female labor force participation. Specifically, in Southern European countries with relatively low formal childcare coverage and low female employment rate, mothers are the main carers of their children. However, grandparents are likely to provide intensive grandchild care if the mother is working with little formal child care available. By contrast, in Nordic countries with relatively high coverage of formal child care and high female labor force participation rate, grandparents are not likely to provide intensive grandchild care due to the availability of formal child care. However, they are likely to provide supplementary grandchild care occasionally, such as driving grandchildren to nurseries or providing care when the mother works extra time. Depression is one of the 4 major diseases influencing human beings. There have been inconsistent findings regarding grandparenting and grandparents' depression in Europe. A longitudinal study by Yazhen et al. Based on the shared data shows no significant associations between grandchild care provision and grandparents' depressive symptoms. However, using the same dataset, Brunello and Recco found that 10 additional hours of childcare per month increased depression among grandmothers by 1.1 percentage points and among grandfathers by 0.7 percentage points, respectively. The variations in the research findings may be caused by the difference in the methods used. Some researchers argued that the influence of grandchild care provision on the health of grandparents was due to between individual differences only, thus within individual analysis with fixed effects estimations did not yield significant results. According to existing research, Southern European countries are permitted by strong filial norms, while Nordic countries tend to have relatively loose family ties and strong welfare states. As shown earlier, different prevalence and amount of grandchild care provision have been found in Southern and Northern European countries. The level of filial expectations or formal support provided by the welfare state interacts with the level of grandchild care provision and consequently affect grandparents' health differently in these countries. A recent piece of research found significant variance in the effects of grandchild caring on grandparents' depressive symptoms in 16 European countries, which may be related to different cultural contexts, whilst suggesting a need for further research to understand such differences. Grandparenting is a gendered experience. Although in recent decades, both women and men are increasingly involved in many activities to an equal extent, childcare provision is still viewed as primarily women's responsibility, particularly among older people. For example, Apino et al. Highlight that providing grandchild care only reduces the risk of having depression among European grandmothers, but not their male counterparts. It is also important to distinguish the intensity of grandchild care provision in the study. For example, previous research has shown that non-intensive grandchild care is associated with a reduction in depressive symptoms for both women and men in France, whilst increasing provision of grandchild care to intensive level increases depression among women in Poland, Spain, Estonia, and Sweden. Based on the literature review, it is not clear whether the effect of grandchild caring on grandparents' depressive symptoms differs across Eastern and Western cultures. In addition, little research has investigated the role of macro-level factors in determining the relationship between grandparenthood and one's depression across countries. One reason is the lack of available high-quality international data with relevant information. A few studies have shown that culture, such as family norms, and policies, such as public childcare services, parental leave regulation, and women labor force participation, can moderate the association between grandparenting and late life depression. However, there has been no quantitative analysis examining the role of a country's economy in influencing the relationship between grandchild caring and grandparents' depression. One recent study investigated the cross-national difference in the impact of having children on the parents' quality of life and how such relationship depends on the country's economy and welfare state. Based on the longitudinal share and ELSA data, the researcher found that older people living in countries with lower GDP benefited more from parenthood than those living in other countries. Although this study focused on parenthood rather than grandparenthood, it has shown a light on examining the role of a country's economy to moderate the relationship between grandparenthood and one's depression. So This study set out with the aims of assessing the cross-national differences in the impact of grandchild caring on grandparents' depression in England, Europe, and China, and understanding the role of the national economy, grandparents' gender, and the intensity of grandchild care provision. The study aimed to shed light on the following research questions. First, how does becoming a grandparent change people's depressive symptoms, and how does this vary across England, Europe, and China? Second, does the national economy modify the relationship between grandparenthood and depressive symptoms in England, Europe, and China? Next, are there gender differences in the effects of becoming a grandparent on people's depressive symptoms in England, Europe, and China? And finally, how does providing different intensities of grandchild care impact on depression among older people across Europe and China? In this final question, I exclude England from the analysis as the measure of grandchild care provision is not comparable in the ELSA compared to the SHARE and the CHARLS surveys, which I will explain in detail later. In terms of potential theoretical explanations, the role theory and the structural ambivalence theory help to understand the cross-national differences. The role theory includes the role strength and the role enhancement theory. The role strength theory focuses on the perceived strength and decreased health resulting from multiple roles. By contrast, the role enhancement theory proposes that role accumulation leads to positive feelings such as self-esteem and personality enhancement. Therefore, occupying multiple role responsibilities contributes to better health outcomes. As suggested by previous research, the two role theories complement each other, and one may outweigh the other depending on the context. The structural ambivalence theory elaborates the conflict between individual behaviors and individuals' social context, which has been used to understand the cross-national differences in the effects of grandparenthood on individuals' depression. For example, previous research has shown that in European countries with a stronger societal expectation towards grandparental childcare, such as Italy, grandparents who do not provide grandchild care report a lower quality of life compared to their counterparts who provide such support, which may due to that the lack of providing grandchild care has a conflict with the fulfillment of filial expectation and consequently leads to a lower quality of life. Based on the literature review and theoretical framework, the following hypotheses are proposed. Hypothesis 1, cross-national variations exist in the relationship between transitioning to grandparenthood and one's depression. Hypothesis 2 and 3 propose that in these wealthy countries, transitioning to grandparenthood has a protective effect against depression among grandparents. And in wealthier countries, transitioning to grandparenthood increases depression among grandparents. This is because most people retire at an older age in higher income countries compared to lower income countries. Therefore, grandparents in higher income countries may be more likely to experience depression resulting from a role overload, such as combining paid work and grandparenting. By contrast, the transition to grandparenthood may provide a sense of purpose and pride for new grandparents in lower income countries, taking into account both stronger family ties and the lower retirement age compared to higher income countries, which consequently lessens grandparents' depression symptoms based on the role enhancement theory. Next, it is hypothesized that gender gap of the effect of grandparenthood on depression is wider in lower income countries than higher income countries. Women in many countries, particularly lower income countries, are expected to take on more family responsibilities than men due to their different positions in the social structure. And they are also more likely than men to experience strain from transitioning to grandparenthood, especially taking account of the increase in grandmothers' participation in the labor force. Finally, it is hypothesized that intensive care for grandchildren has a protective effect against depression among grandparents in China and Southern European countries, as this is consistent with the cultural expectations. 3 HRS sister surveys from Gateway to Global Aging are used in this study, including the ELSA, the SHARE, and the CHARLS conducted in England, Europe, and China respectively. Gateway to Global Aging is a platform for population survey data on aging around the world and provides harmonized versions of the HRS sister surveys. The variables in the harmonized datasets are defined as similar as possible to the HRS survey, aiming to facilitate cross-national comparisons. The HRS sister surveys are conducted in the US, Mexico, England, Europe, Korea, and China, etc. To date, 16 surveys covering more than 35 countries in the world are available on this platform. The surveys contain multidisciplinary modules, including demographics, health, economics, and family structure, etc. In order to compare information in the same periods, 3 WIPs of the harmonized ELSA, SHARE, and CHARLS collected in 2011, 2013, and 2015 are used for the analysis. The analysis is divided into 2 main parts. Analysis 1 examines the effect of transitioning to grandparenthood on grandparents' depression, and analysis 2 examines the effect of grandchild care provision on the depression among grandparents. Let's focus on the first part of the analysis. So the outcome variable is the depression of respondents, which self-reported in the surveys. It's measured by the 8-item CESD in the ELSA, 12-item EuroD in the SHARE, and 10-item CESD in the CHARLS in each wave. The total depression score ranges between 0 to 8 in the ELSA, 0 to 12 in the SHARE, and 0 to 30 in the CHARLS. The higher the score, the more depressive symptoms the respondent has. This table shows how the depression variable is measured in the original surveys. So 6 questions are the same in the ELSA and CHARLS, and the others are slightly different. Previous research has shown that the measures in different settings are valid and comparable. Hence, differences in measuring depression in these countries should not be a concern. I used 3 forms of the depression variables and compare them as a robustness check. The original depression score, the normalized depression score ranging between 0 to 12, and the binary variable reflecting depression status of respondents. As has been done in existing studies, the cutoff point for the category of being depressed is 4 for the ELSA and SHARE and 12 for the CHARLS. The explanatory variable is transitioning to grandparenthood. Transitioning to grandparenthood is captured when respondents had no grandchild at baseline and had at least 1 grandchild in 2013 or 15, or respondents had no grandchild in 2013 and had at least 1 grandchild in 2015. The same measures have been used in previous research. The inclusion of covariates are based on the literature review, the availability of the variables, and the analysis results. The macro level factor includes the logarithms of the country's level income, ranging between 5 to 10. Health indicators in the analysis include the ADLs, IADLs, and the self-reported health. Social demographic variables are controlled, including age, which is centered at 6, marital status, educational attainment, the employment status, and the natural log of the individual income of respondents. Regarding sample selection, Respondents who were aged between 50 and 90 and who had at least 2 valid answers in terms of their grandparenthood status and depressive symptoms were selected. In addition, respondents who were grandchildless at baseline were kept as the analytical sample in order to focus on estimating the effects of transitioning to grandparenthood on the individual's depression. The final sample includes 15 countries, 7,404 male respondents, 8,142 female respondents, and in total, 40,713 observations. Results from the intercept-only model suggest that almost 22% of the total variance in reporting depressive symptoms were attributed to differences between countries, and 40% of the total variance in reporting depressive symptoms were attributed to differences between individuals within countries. The hierarchical structure of the data determines the use of multi-level modeling in this study. Multi-level linear regression analysis with restricted maximum likelihood estimation were performed, covering 15 countries using data. With the small number of countries in the analysis, the restricted maximum likelihood estimates were preferred to the maximum likelihood estimates in order to reduce bias. Independent residuals are assumed in order to avoid overcomplication, as the average respondent has only 2.7 measurement occasions. Cross-level interactions between transitioning to grandparenthood and the country-level income was included to investigate whether a country's income modifies the impact of transitioning to grandparenthood and depression. The modeling results are provided in Table 2 in detail. I'm going to skip interpreting the table and move on to some plots which illustrate the same results for the ease of interpretation. First, Figure 3 shows the country-level depression scores for respondents in 15 countries. We can see that depression scores vary by country in the sample. Specifically, people aged between 50 to 90 in Denmark, Netherlands, Switzerland, Sweden, Austria, and England reported significantly lower depression score than those in China, Italy, Spain, Estonia, and France. Figure 4 shows how becoming a grandparent influences the depression score by country and gender. In all countries, women had higher depression scores than men. In countries with relatively lower income, including China, Czech Republic, Estonia, Italy, Spain, and Slovenia, becoming a grandparent reduced the depression score among both men and women. The results support Hypothesis 1 and shows that cross-national variations exist in the relationship between transitioning to grandparenthood and one's depression, and further provide evidence for Hypothesis 2 and imply that becoming a grandparent lessens the effect of depressive symptoms in lower income countries, which supports the role enhancement theory. In countries with relatively higher income, such as Denmark, Netherlands, Sweden, Belgium, France, and England, becoming a grandparent increased the depression score among both men and women. The results provide evidence for Hypothesis 3 by highlighting that transitioning to grandparenthood increased the depression scores in higher income countries and suggest that the disadvantageous effect of grandparenthood on depression outweighs its beneficial effect in higher income countries. In addition, Figure 4 also shows that gender difference in the effect of becoming a grandparent on grandparents' depression relates to a country's income. There is a larger difference between the predicted depression score for men and women in lower income countries compared to higher income countries, and this finding supports Hypothesis 4. Now let's move on to see how the intensity of grandchild care provision influences grandparents' depression and how this varies by country. The outcome variable used in analysis 2 is similar to analysis 1. The explanatory variable is grandchild care provision. The ELSA has been excluded in the analysis. This is because this variable was measured differently in the ELSA, in a different module, and the information was not directly collected compared to the share and the CHARLS. Consequently, the prevalence of grandchild care provision is very low based on the ELSA data, and including such information would have biased the results. In the CHARLS, the respondents who provided grandchild care were asked which of their child they cared for and how many weeks and hours per week during the previous year they spent taking care of their grandchildren. By contrast, in waves 4 to 6 of the share, the respondents were asked about the frequency of providing grandchild care. So 1 is about daily, 2 is about every week, 3 about every month, and 4 less often. In order to obtain a comparable measure for intensive grandchild care provision among these countries, 2 dimensions are combined to define the intensity of care, which is the number of hours of care for the child's data and the frequency of grandchild care provision for the shared data. Intensive grandchild care provision refers to care provided by respondents on a daily or weekly basis in the share, and those who provided grandchild care more than 40 hours per week in the CHARLS. Using 40 hours per week as a threshold for intensive grandchild care provision is because it's comparable to holding a full-time job, and it has been used in previous research in the Chinese context. In line with previous research, a 3-category variable, including no care, providing intensive care, and providing non-intensive care, capturing whether grandparents provided grandchild care was created. Covariates include 4 baseline health indicators, including depression, ADLS, IADLS, and self-reported health, and social demographic variables, including age, which is centered at 6, age squared, marital status, educational attainment, the employment status, and the natural log of the individual income of respondents. Different to analysis 1, as we are examining the role of grandchild care provision here, respondents who did not have any grandchildren under 16 years were excluded from the analysis. Previous research has examined the effect of grandchild care provision on depression in 16 European countries, however, failing to illustrate a clear pattern. Therefore, in this presentation, I only include a small number of countries in order to reflect a clear Northern European trend. China and 4 European countries, including Denmark, Sweden, Italy, and Spain, were included for comparison. This is because Denmark and Sweden have been treated in previous research as representative of Nordic countries with relatively loose family ties, and Italy and Spain have been shown to represent Southern European countries where filial norms are highly embedded. The final sample includes 4,020 grandfathers and 4,621 grandmothers. Lagged outcome models are used in the analysis to estimate the effects of grandchild care provision in 2013 on the depression of grandparents in 2015. Sorry. Excuse me. Controlling for the respondent's depression and the number of covariates at baseline, as discussed earlier. Controlling for the baseline health of respondents, and using lagged outcome models to examine the effects help to reduce reverse causality in the estimation, as the predictor is measured preceding the outcome measured. Marginal effects of providing non-intensive grandchild care and intensive grandchild care on grandparents' depression score compared to not providing grandchild care, and the marginal effects of providing intensive grandchild care on grandparents' depression score compared to providing non-intensive grandchild care are plotted by country and gender. As shown in previous research, plotting the impact of grandchild care on the predicted change in the depression score eases the interpretation of the complex effects. Figure 5 shows the marginal effects of providing grandchild care compared to not providing grandchild care on grandparents' depression by gender and country. As shown in Figure 5a, compared to grandfathers who did not provide any grandchild care, grandfathers who provided non-intensive care in China and Sweden were less likely to report depressive symptoms. A similar relationship was found among grandmothers in China, Denmark, and Sweden. Compared to grandfathers who did not provide any grandchild care, grandfathers who provided intensive care in Italy were less likely to have depressive symptoms. Compared to grandmothers who did not provide any grandchild care, grandmothers who provided intensive care in Italy, Spain, Sweden, and Denmark were less likely to have depressive symptoms. The results partially support Hypothesis 5, showing that intensive care for grandchildren has a protective effect against depression among grandparents in Italy and grandmothers in Spain. However, further investigation is needed to understand the findings which are not consistent with the hypothesis. For example, unexpectedly, the positive effect of providing intensive grandchild care on grandparents' depression was also found among Swedish and Danish grandmothers. This also suggests the need of incorporating specific country-level factors in future research to better understand the complex pattern. Finally, Figure 6 shows a comparison of the effect of providing intensive and non-intensive grandchild care on the respondent's depression. Compared to providing non-intensive grandchild care, grandmothers providing intensive care had statistically significant higher depression score in China. This finding is not consistent with Hypothesis 5. The structural ambivalence theory cannot explain such findings in China, suggesting a need for theoretical development in this area. So, to repack briefly, people aged 50 to 90 in Denmark, Netherlands, Sweden, Switzerland, Austria, and England were significantly less likely to report depressive symptoms than those in China, Italy, Spain, Estonia, and France. In terms of the role of the national economy, becoming a grandparent reduced the depression score among both men and women in lower income countries, but increased it in higher income countries. In addition, the gender gap in the effects of becoming a grandparent on one's depression was wider in lower income countries than higher income countries. Regarding grandchild care provision, grandparents providing non-intensive grandchild care were less likely to report depressive symptoms compared to those who did not provide any care in China, Sweden, and Denmark. Grandparents in Italy and grandmothers in Spain, Denmark, and Sweden who provided intensive care were less likely to have depressive symptoms compared to grandparents who did not provide any grandchild care. And finally, grandmothers who provided intensive care in China reported more depressive symptoms compared to grandmothers who provided non-intensive grandchild care. So, what do the findings tell us? Healthy grandparenthood is of great importance in the context of rapid population aging. We know the fact that grandchild care is important for releasing the middle generation to work, but extending working lives is also important. With policy reforms aiming to increase the pension age being implemented worldwide, the stress resulting from becoming a grandparent and caring for grandchildren whilst working could increase if people retire at an older age. Policy decision makers need to be aware of the increasing importance of grandparents in providing childcare for their grandchildren. Family and other policies involving older people need to take into account the impact of grandparenting on grandparents' health. Higher income countries in particular should investigate policy instruments that might buffer the negative impact of transitioning to grandparenthood. Particular attention should be devoted to grandmothers who are more likely than grandfathers to experience depression when transitioning to grandparenthood. The intensity of grandchild care provision also matters, and it interacts with country-level factors such as national economy or the country's cultural and expectations towards grandparenting, which needs further examination. It is important to evaluate how family policy interacts with the intensity of grandchild care provision and how they can influence grandparents' health together. In a nutshell, understanding the complex impact of grandparenting on individuals' health contributes to the global strategy of active aging. I have recently published a CBC policy briefing based on the research findings. Please have a read if you're interested. That's all for my presentation. As the research is still going on, I'd be grateful if you have any comments to improve it. Please also feel free to ask any questions now and contact me after the meeting if you like any information. Thank you.
Thank you, Yazhen, for a brilliant talk, and well done for excellent timing.